Good evening, church, and welcome to another of our Wednesday evening Vesper sessions. The image that I'm using for tonight is actually a picture that was taken at the Flume Gorge at Franconia National Park in New Hampshire in 2010 on one of the most unusual mission trips that we really ever had. And that mission trip is going to actually be a part of tonight's message. But I just thought you'd be interested to know that that was one of the images from that actual trip. That was a trip that we took to Horton Center. We literally were on a mountain for the course of a week, and we had some very interesting communication, or really lack of communication, that led into the trip, but I'll get more to that later. As we prepare this evening, I think that many of you have probably seen on the news information about the continuing evolution of COVID and some additional closures and changes to the rules that are coming this week as a result of the increase in cases. And so I just want to encourage us to continue to pray for God's love and God's strength to get us through this time, and pray that there will be an end to this disease, an end to this pandemic. In terms of St. Paul's, the changes don't change religious gatherings in terms of the numbers that are allowed to gather and so forth, but I do think that it's important that we heed the same caution, that we hear the same words, and that we do everything that we can possibly do to keep ourselves and each other safe during this time. So continue to wear those masks and do all of those things that you've been doing to be able to try to protect the people around you. Stay safe and know that you are unquestionably loved. So tonight's passage comes from the 28th chapter of Genesis, verses 10 through 19. Jacob left Beersheba and went to Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob woke up from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at first. I think there are a lot of times where we aren't completely aware of the power of the place where we might be, or the power of the experience that we are having, until after the experience is over. Until after the time that we've been spending at working at whatever it was or doing whatever it was. Sometimes we don't realize how transformative something is for our life until it reaches the end. A few years ago, actually 2010, we took a trip to Horton Center in New Hampshire. It literally was a mountaintop about 10,000 feet above sea level, where we stayed at a camp and we worked in the surrounding community. And it was a trip like no other, mostly because despite the communication that I had had with the director leading into the trip, not a single thing went as planned, not one. The person that I was working with, I explained that we really wanted to do some work in the community, meaning that we wanted to work on the home of someone in need, maybe someone who was elderly or disabled or just needed a hand up. We wanted to be able to connect with a family as part of the experience that we were having. You see, sometimes when we go on a mission trip, we spend our entire time working on the camp or some part of the actual place where that's hosting us, and the year before we had done that. So I didn't want to have 2 years in a row of just working on a camp. I wanted the kids to be able to experience connecting with other people, and so that's what I asked for. And so I was very specific about saying we want to be out in the community, and the person heard community and translated it into community service. And so that person coordinated with somebody else at the camp, who then passed our request on to yet another person, and the next thing you know, our job, or the jobs that they had for us, were pulling weeds outside of the U.S. Postal Service, and laying down mulch at the Dollar General store. They had us lined up to go to the library and re-barcode all of the books. Those were the kinds of jobs that they had lined up for us, and our kids, who are wonderful, they're always wonderful, and they did the work without complaining, but you could just see in their eyes and in their hearts that they were not really doing what they thought they had traveled to New Hampshire to do, and they were not doing what I thought we had traveled to New Hampshire to do. And as it turned out, they were not doing what God had them go to New Hampshire to do. What happened next was pretty amazing, actually. As we were working, I believe at the Dollar General store, we were putting down mulch, and this guy, who I'd never met before, of course, I'd never even been to New Hampshire before, came driving by and complimented the work that we were doing and said, I really wish that your team could come and help me out. And so I said to him, well, what do you have going on? And he said, I actually run the local botanical garden, but it's in such bad shape that nobody uses it, or not very many people use it, and it's a struggle because I just don't have enough volunteers. And so in that moment, I don't recommend this, by the way, but in that moment I just said, show me. And I ended up getting in his Jeep, and he drove me over to the other side of the town and showed me this amazingly beautiful garden that just stretched on forever, that just needed so much love. And I looked at him and said, if you trust me, I think that we can do something awesome here. And again, he had never met me, I had never met him, and he just looked at me and said, I trust you. And sure enough, the kids willingly gave up working on mulch at the Dollar General store. I'm still not quite sure how we ended up with that job, but they gave up working on that project. Actually, they finished it off enough so that it did look nice, but then came over to the gardens, and we moved from weeding at the post office and mulching at a local store to blazing a trail through this botanical garden. The kids worked tirelessly, pulling aside the weeds and the dirt, and building stairs and transforming that garden into something that could be used widely. And it was so cool. And it was in the moment that we were leaving, in the moments where I was looking back at this place where we had spent an entire week, a completely unexpected week. We never planned to be there. We never planned to be working on these gardens, that I realized just how much God had been in that place. The gifts of every single kid lined up perfectly with the jobs at hand. The adults that we had on hand were exactly the folks who were needed to be able to accomplish every single task. And I heard from the person who runs the gardens soon after we left. And he was sharing with me how much joy was in his heart because people from the community were starting to use the gardens. They were walking the nature trail. We had built a picnic table from scratch and set it up back along the trail so that people would walk back to the dried riverbed and they could sit there and look out over nature's beauty and have a bite to eat. And people were using it. People were coming out. There was transformation as a result of what the kids and the adult volunteers had accomplished. And I'm not trying to toot our horn here, but what I am trying to say is that there are so often occasions where we don't even realize that we are treading upon holy ground, where we don't realize in the moment that we are doing it, in the moment that we are living it, the deep presence that God has in that space. And I have to tell you that as hard as these last months have been, as hard as isolation has been, as difficult as it has been to see people sick and to see people dying and to worry all the time and to see numbers on the news that are frightening, as difficult as all of those things have been, I am convinced that God continues to be present among us. We continue together to walk upon holy ground, to experience the presence of God and the love of God and the strength of God. We continue to be a community that supports and loves each other. What more? What more could we as a church want to find, expect to find, but the presence of God finding its way into the most unexpected places? I'd like to suggest that wherever it is that you lay your head tonight, like Jacob did so long ago, may very well be upon holy ground that God has provided for you. God is not just in the tabernacle. God is not just in the sanctuary of our church. God is not just at the top of the highest of mountains, but God is in the hearts and minds and homes of every single one of us. Friends, you just need to know that there is no place that we can go, there is nothing that we can do that will ever separate us from the love that God has for you, and the love that God has for me, and the love that God has for all of us. Amen. Please pray with me. Loving God, there are so many times that we ask you to enter in, that we ask you to bring your presence, but then we remember that you are already there. In thunder and in silence, in stillness and chaos, in the hearts of people who feel very strong and those who feel ever so small. In the joy and the sadness, the anxiety and the calm, in times of bondage and freedom, purity and deepest sin, throughout unity and divide, peace and struggle, justice and injustice. God, we know that you are there in all of those things. Help us to feel you. Help us to know you. Help us to be comforted in the knowledge that you are our God and we are your children. It is in you that we place our trust and in you that we believe. Amen. Good night, church.